Hey guys, it's Joel, and I wanted to do a video on a topic that I've gotten a lot of questions about, and that is the Enneagram versus the Myers-Briggs. Now, both of these have pros and cons. The MBTI is based a little bit more on Jung. I tend to like that one a little bit more because I feel like it gives me as a clinician information that I am able to understand things that are going on underneath the surface. The Enneagram, I think, is a little bit more focused on the surface of a person. One of the things that I hear said a lot is that the Myers-Briggs type indicator represents nurture or nature, kind of an inborn trait, whereas the Enneagram represents nurture or how somebody's brought up. I don't think that's wrong, but I also think it's a little bit more complicated. So one way of thinking about that is that the in childhood, you know, there's something going on in the house that the child perceives as kind of a problem to individuating or figuring itself out. And that could be lots of things. Maybe it's my job to work and work and work until I'm just exhausted, and that's what I see caregivers do, and that's how the family views responsibility and love and self. And so I do that, and then I become an exhausted caregiver, maybe, or helper type. Maybe I am supposed to mediate between two parents who are fighting all the time. Mom's a Republican and dad's a hippie, and I'm trying to get them to understand each other. And so I'm always trying to reconcile both sides, understand them, see something good about them, and then help people facilitate communication. And I can't stop doing that. Maybe my job is to a million different things. But anyway, the child perceives the problem of the household, and then the child will try and come up with the answer to the household. And the Enneagram, a lot of the time, represents this answer to the household, right? And how much you identify with that. The Myers Briggs is making a different kind of assumption that's based on Jungian depth typology. What the Myers Briggs is doing is saying that there's sort of four modes of thinking or problem solving. And we're only operating in one of them all of the time. And each one is directly opposed to another kind of thinking that we're not using if we're using the one on top. So the Myers-Briggs will give you four letters. And of those four letters, there's four that you're not. There's a type beneath here. And why that is helpful is because what it's doing is it's coming up with the kind of thinking that you are comfortable with. Do I go into my head or do I reach out into the world for help? Do I sit back and take my hands off the steering wheel and say I'm not going to do it? Or do I try and understand and plan and make judgments and figure out what it is that I'm supposed to do? Those are two ways of thinking about life. Sort of improvisational jazz music and classical music extreme planning. Am I trying to intuit and sort of feel what it is, the way this thing works? Am I looking at a painting and saying, okay, well, this painting is going on during this movement, and it looks like the artist is trying to convey an emotion with this light, and there's lots of women in the painting, and so maybe the women in the painting are telling me that the artist is making a feeling about that. It feels like a happy, is that the way that you go at artwork, or is it, when was this painted? What was he saying? What was his name? I'm going to make this list of rules that let me understand and interpret artwork, and I'm going to look at what other critics said before. I'm not going to try and make my own criticism. So those modes of thinking are directly opposed. The Myers-Briggs is helpful. Where it isn't helpful is where it's used as a horoscope, where you read the description and you say, well, this is me, this isn't, that's kind of right. That's not how it's supposed to be used. Where it is helpful is when it's used in order for you to break apart the way that you're thinking. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about the Myers-Briggs is that when you get it, and I do think this represents a more nature-based type. Some of these archetypes are just your hardwiring, how you're wired with. Some of them are the way that you're taught that you have to think, and that's the part of the Myers-Briggs that will change if you take it at two different points in life. For example, most people are going to be higher correlated with an E, an extrovert, when they're in college, because it's kind of a time of explosive social development. And so you're figuring out how to do that, whether or not it really is who you are. So when those types are drawn on the Myers-Briggs, that inferior type, which is the type that you're bad at, the kind of thinking that you're bad at, that's usually what your shadow is going to be, or what you're going to resort to in an extreme crisis. So when you have exhausted your extrovert self, you're trying so hard to solve a problem with it when you're in crisis, you've put all your energy into thinking this one way, and that doesn't work, then I'm going to shut down and I'm going to go into my head. So the Myers-Briggs will kind of let you predict if somebody's really highly identified with one of these letters, which one it is that they're going to revert to when they're in an emotional crisis and breakdown, which is sort of interesting because patients generally don't know that about themselves. People generally don't know that about themselves, but it can help them understand why they do things in the past that they don't understand when you introduce them to their shadow type. John Beebe, who's a depth typologist, says that any part of psychotherapy, the reason that it works is that it's getting somebody to be more comfortable with their inferior type and less comfortable with their exterior type. That you're taking them and saying, yeah, you want to think this way because you're good at it, but some problems you need to be able to think that way. And that the reason that people change in psychotherapy is because you're teaching them that sometimes they have to introvert, sometimes they have to feel, sometimes they have to think, sometimes they have to perceive, and sometimes they have to judge. And that makes the person a lot more flexible. One of the things that's also interesting about the Myers-Briggs is that ability doesn't really relate to your type. You could be really good at thinking in a way that you're not comfortable with. And that's where you get some of the extreme shadow typology. So to me, that is interesting. If I see a really high end, then I know that a need wasn't met in childhood, that somebody was always trying to like reach out and understand their environment in a way. I have information about what's going on with the Myers-Briggs. The Enneagram, one of the reasons that I don't like it is that it's telling people information that usually they already know. It's not really telling you anything that you don't know already. And so when you're looking at it, people get excited and they're like, yeah, I am a helper. I am an investigator. I do this. I do that. And then that's used to say, well, this is what you're passionate about. This is what motivates you. This is what you need to follow with your career. And I'm kind of suspicious of that because certain things that we learn as the answer to childhood can become a pathology later or are not actually helpful when we overindulge them. So maybe I learned to be the mediator in childhood and I have to mediate all the time. Okay, that's not a bad thing if I'm going to become a lawyer or a judge or something. But where it becomes a bad thing is where I can't sit with certainty, where I can't say, this is a black and white question, where I have to at every moment say, both sides are a little bit true, even when they aren't, just because I'm uncomfortable in my shadow with ever picking a side. And you see a lot of people who are pathologically moderate, who go into a black and white situation and have to overcomplicate it and say, like, well, I'm always in the middle. That's something that you should look at in therapy. I don't think the Enneagram helps you do that. One of the things that the Enneagram does do is it says in some of his literature that when you are looking at a a type, that there's a way that you can integrate, and then that you're supposed to sort of integrate, and the way you do that is you look at the core vice that's underneath. I think he says core vice. I don't remember the language exactly. That is underneath that type. So you're trying to, you might, when you're trying to be motivated to achieve, maybe that makes you greedy or something. To me, that's just compensation. You can get into the room with somebody and say, what are you afraid of? As a clinician in my head, I'm saying, what are you afraid of? What is the feeling that you didn't want to feel in childhood? And so obviously the answer of your life that you're orienting yourself around is a response to that shame. Again, that's just shadow, and I don't know that the Enneagram lets you get in touch with that very cleanly. Sometimes it helps reinforce traits in a person that are bad by justifying it with a test. And that's where I think the Enneagram can be used wrong. I don't think that's the intention of the test, but I do think giving somebody a one-word type and saying you're a helper, you're an investigator, you're a this, is a little bit less helpful of a way to give someone information. It's a little bit easier for them to understand, but it also doesn't always help them. There's a correlation between certain Myers-Briggs types and certain Enneagram styles. So the INFP type is very correlated with the investigator type in the Enneagram. But what the INFP does is it gives you some more information about the reasons you're making that thing so that you can decide if you need to investigate, if that's really healthy and why that's there. Yet it's 4 letters, it's messy, each one of those letters has a reverse, it takes a little bit more time. And so right now, the Myers-Briggs is a little bit less popular. That's my opinion, and I hope that was helpful. Give me a comment if you have any questions.